पुंज सत्पुरुष है, तह हंसन विश्राम।
VYGOS VYGOS Global Online Satsang, Global Online, which is scheduled every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Indian Standard Time. Those who would miss to attend the morning session can listen to the broadcast Sunday evening at 4:30 p.m. at Indian Standard Time. The aim of this forum is to give the entire world an opportunity to learn the ancient science of meditation and benefit from this pious service inspired by Sadguru the pioneer of Vihangam Yoga. If you are interested in learning or want to conduct a program at your place, and for any inquiry related to it, please feel free to write to us at vihangamyog.org. That is info at vihangamyoga.org.
Jai Sudev, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Vihangam Yoga Global Online Satsang. I myself am Avinav, joining again from Sydney, and I'm very excited to bring to you another week of the beautiful, insightful, and deep conversations which we have been very fortunate to have on this platform to all of you wonderful listeners. So once again, welcome. If you've joined for the first time, a warm first welcome to you. We hope you enjoy your stay. For those of you returning once more, thank you for your ongoing support. You know, in this series, as you would have seen last week, we're layering on top of the series we underwent before on controlling mind. And now we're moving toward trying to understand how we can strengthen our urge to meditate. So in the previous series, we learned about a little bit about the mind and what the impact of controlling mind is. But perhaps even after that, you know, as people living in such a busy world, it's very common for us to understand on a conceptual level why something is fruitful or positive, but to then enact that is a separate thing completely. And in this series, what we really want to give all you wonderful listeners is an understanding of why meditation and this urge for meditation is strong and should be strong within spiritual seekers. And so last week we heard a bit about this in the context of mind and what the function of mind is and where the mind lives. This week we're really looking at two terms which you may hear a lot as spiritual seekers and people who are exposed to spiritual philosophy. You may have heard of the terms consciousness and inertness. You may have heard of the different entities which, you know, use the weight of these two domains to act, from the indriyas to the soul to the mind. And a lot of this can bring about confusion. It can bring about doubts. It can be a little abstract. So today what we want to give to you all is some kind of information, some kind of examples, a conversation really, from which you can take away a clearer understanding of what we mean by inert and conscious and what the spiritual journey is really trying to help us do. Now, of course, our conversation this week will be equipped with a global panel of which I'll be introducing our members. And it will be done through the lens of the ancient-most science of spirituality, the science of Vihangam Yoga, and the medium of Saurabh, which is a distillation of the experiences of Adonai Sri Sadguru Sadafaliji Maharaj. So I hope you're as excited as I am to dive into the topic for this week, Strengthening Mind, Lesson 2, Consciousness and Inertness. Before we begin unwinding the topic for this week, let's stop for the welcoming prayers. These prayers are offered in the feet of the master of Vihangam Yoga. The Swadhyaya and Madhulana specifically are traditional preparatory devices which really supercharge the environment which we are in and help us introspect and understand things further. So let's invoke the blessings of the Master and embark upon this journey in his divine presence.
आज स्वागत नित्य गुरुवर संत शुभागम आइए, अध्यात्म विद्या दिव्य ज्योति सोमरस बरसाइए। दोष दूर गुण दूर करके शुद्ध हंस बनाइए, भेद गम गति ज्ञान गर्जन शक्ति द्वार हटाइए। खुले द्वारा शब्द सागर भक्त जन अनहवाइए, जन सदा फल विश्व शिक्षक शान आन बचाइए, शान आन बचाइए। विश्व शांति नाम मंगल परम गुरु को ध्याइए, वर्ग द्वंद्व शांति दूर कर भाव भेद मिटाइए। सार्वभौम समष्टि सत्ता आत्मराज बनाइए, वेश भाषा भाव जगमय ज्ञान पर दर्शाइए। समृद्धि सुख शांति धरातल स्वर्ग भूमि बनाइए, विश्व शिक्षक जन सदा फल नीति स्वर अपनाइए, नीति स्वर अपनाइए।
Thank you for that beautiful composition. As mentioned, the topic of the day for this week is Strengthening Meditation, Lesson 2, Consciousness and Inertness. As you're all thinking through and collecting your thoughts on this topic, we ask you all to share any thoughts or questions you have on our two avenues, the WhatsApp number, which was just on screen and will come back in just a moment, as well as slido.com/VYGOS. We'll be looking at both of these platforms over the course of today, and we're really keen to get engaged with all of you wonderful listeners and really understand what it is you want to understand better and what things perhaps we haven't been able to explain as clearly as you'd like. Because as I mentioned, we really want you all to take away something from this week, particularly a clear understanding of what inertness and consciousness is. So let's move toward our Q&A session for the day. We'll be first spending about 20 minutes or so on the first part of our discussion, and I'll be introducing our speakers in just a moment. In the middle of our session, we'll stop for a bhajan, just so you can all collect your thoughts and start to think through some of the things we've discussed, after which we'll have another 20 to 30-minute discussion and then wrap up for the week. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two speakers for today. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kumar Hemant Singh, or Dr. Hemant, as we lovingly call him. He works as an associate professor at IIT Bombay in the Department of Earth Sciences. He formerly worked as a scientist at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, USA. And most prominently, he's a very dedicated he's a very dedicated and illustrious speaker of Vihangam Yoga, a person who takes very complex concepts and explains them in a way which we can all understand. So, we're very lucky to have him join us this week. So I hope you can hear us, Hemantji.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Hemantji. And I'd also like to introduce Vijay Davuluri, who is also an ardent disciple of Saurabh. He's been practicing Vihangam Yoga for about 10 years, and professionally, he's working as an IT architect at a US federal agency, the IRS. So I hope you can also hear me, Vijayji.
Very clear, Abhinavji. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you both for joining us this week. So I'll direct this first question, or perhaps just a quick prelude on what we're talking about today. So consciousness and inertness, or depending on how you order it in your mind, inertness and consciousness. These two concepts are very fundamental, per at least the exposure that I've had thus far in my spiritual journey, in understanding the Hangam Yoga itself, and of course in understanding spiritual philosophy at large. These two terms can be a little abstract, can be difficult to grasp. I know for myself, I found them difficult to, and I still sometimes find them difficult to grasp and explain. So perhaps if I could first direct a question toward you, Hemantji. The first question which really comes to mind, if we look at these two terms, is what is meant by the term inertness? If it's a quality, then how do we identify that quality, whether it is within the body or outside the body? Could you give an example of what inertness really entails?
A very nice question. Actually, we can understand this from the biology point of view. Since childhood, we have been listening and studying that there are two objects. One object is living and the other object is non-living. So when we say inertness, anything that does not have any life, they do not reproduce, they do not take action of its own. Anything that you see around us, in your room, in your place where you're living, that does not have any action of its own, or all inert. But the moment we go a little higher from the consciousness or from the spiritual aspect of this has become, or more clarity has come to this when the saints experience it and talk about it. But we'll talk about that later on. But quick declination from the living, anything that's living is an object or entity that has knowledge, desire, and an ability to take an action. Someone who can perform or act. It's easy to make out, right? That anything that's moving, they're acting, and they're all part of consciousness. So they exhibit some kind of life forms. They're all part of living and they are conscious. So that would be a simple definition of energy.
Yeah, thank you for that, Hemantji. I think that definitely sets us up to explore this better. And perhaps if I could quickly switch over to you, Vijay, if you wanted to add anything there in terms of just giving the foundational, just a quick word on what inertness is. I think Hemantji already explained it, but perhaps if you could also layer on top in terms of your thinking, what would you say the building blocks of inertness are? Would it be fair to say it's the physical atoms which we learn about in school? How would you layer on top of what Hemantji has already described?
Good question, Binawji. So, like Hemantji gave a good definition of what an inert entity or inertness is. Basically, an inert body or inert entity is something which has an end. So in other words, it's not it's transient in nature. It's not something which is eternal. One that is constantly changing and that ceased to exist, which is, in other words, which is not eternal or conscious. The inert transient entities are basically made of 5 fundamental elements, which are the building blocks for inert are the sky, the wind, the fire, the water, and earth. And these 5 fundamental elements have the subjects of sound, touch, taste, smell, and a vision. Whatever is within the reach of the indriyas or the sensory organs are all transient in nature or inert. What is permanent is something which is beyond the reach of these senses. Hemant, could you add more anything on the building blocks?
Yeah, nice, definitely. See, let's talk about a little more. Let's deeper aspect. The building block of life is cell, right? So the cell, it's getting energy from somewhere. So cell can reproduce. So definitely, it's a living building block of life. But cell itself is made of atoms and molecules, which Abhinavji was referring to. Atoms and molecules also have vibrational energy. Only thing is that if you burn a cell, it dies off. But if you burn an atom and molecule, nothing happens to it because it's inert. So we need to understand that our building block of life, the cell, the biologist talks about it, is a living organism. But the parts that makes that cell itself is inert. And let's take a bigger picture. Our body itself. I'm talking because I'm using my energy. And that energy is supplied by what we all understand is a soul or a consciousness. I'm conscious of what am I speaking. But let's say if you train a robot for that, you are going to program the robot and it speaks the way you would want it. So when you come back to your body, the action which this body takes is a part of consciousness, but body itself is made of atoms and molecules, which is inert itself. So the moment I step out of this body, we all understand that we die off. And when we die, basically the consciousness moves out of this inert body, and this inert body remains as it is. And as Vijay just mentioned, that we are made of these 5 elements, and these 5 elements dissolves, goes back to its primordial state where it came from. So this is how we can understand, and definitely we are going to talk about a little more. Over to you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, thank you both. I think that was a very powerful explanation from both of you in terms of how we can think about this. So, just to summarize for you listeners, inertness, if you're trying to identify something which is inert, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Hemant and Vijay, that anything which has a beginning and end is most likely an inert entity. And the building blocks of inert entities are cellular, but more fundamentally, they are not just cellular, they are atomic in nature. And atoms are always going, if you've had the fortune of studying science and mathematics, you would have learned that atoms are always going through an exchange of form and what they contribute to. In that same nature, inertness has an end, but it also carries this quality of exchanging form, I suppose. Would you agree with that, Hemant and Vijay?
Yeah, definitely. So the changes that brings about in atoms and molecules are transient in nature, and it's just happening because there is an exchange of energy. But the conscious element, which we call soul, remains as it is forever. And because they're not made of atoms and molecules, they're not made of any part of this earth or the material or any object or entity that the science instruments can detect or understand. So it's beyond that, which we often sometimes call casually, that's non-matter. It's not made of matter. So yes, it does not go in and a change. But yes, all the atoms and molecules do undergo change because of the exchange of energy. And that's how, because of the chemical reactions that happens, that's why we see this diverse world. Yes, that's true. Abhinavji.
Yeah, thank you, Hemant. So, I think that's a perfect segue into the second word which we're looking at today, which is consciousness. And arguably, this is really a portal into Saurabh and into what the wisdom of Sadhguru Siddhartha Maharaj, who, in his, very long meditative journey, experienced consciousness in arguably, the most innocent or, for lack of a better term, at all the stages in which it can be experienced. So perhaps if we could again start with you, Hemant. How would you explain consciousness, and how would you, how can we it's difficult to really term this, but how can we identify what consciousness is? Like if I'm sitting in a room and I am just observing myself, how can I observe and distinguish what is part of my consciousness and what is not part of my consciousness? What is consciousness per se?
Thank you very much. Actually, now we are moving into this real spiritual part. Sadhguru Shadafal Devji Maharaj practiced meditation in a cave for 70 long years and realized all the tenets and secrets of the Brahm, the very powerhouse of all the knowledge. And he has brought about all his experience in his spiritual text, scripture, which we call Swarved. And there's nothing better than to take an example from Swarved. Swami writes in Swarved, Iksha Gyan Prayatna hai, Chinna Suchetan Jan, Ja Mahatina Yah Nahi Dishe, Takar Jad Kariman. So I think we come back to that biology aspect, but we'll just leave it as it is. Any entity that has knowledge, that means we can understand our world, the environment which we live in. We are living in a room, so we are very much aware where we are sitting and what action are we doing at this moment. We all have desires because we can think and act on anything that comes to our mind. Even if we have to take something from the kitchen, we walk up to that and we get that. Anything we want to do at this moment, we're writing, speaking, talking. We have desires and thought process that's going on in your mind at this moment, in your brain. They all comes up and adds up into part of desires. And then the ability to take an action, to act upon your thought process, something which you really want to act at this moment, are all part of consciousness. That's what makes us or define the consciousness. And this body moves with you along with that. Why? Because we are residing in this body. Anything, any object that does not display that. In this room, we have furnitures. We have objects. We have pen and paper in front of us. We have laptops and computers in front of us. They are objects that would be found another day. If we come back today, tomorrow, day after, they'll be still lying there. The furnitures won't move, but we would move. Why? Because we have a desire to act. We have knowledge. We are conscious of our life. So that's how Sadhguru Sadafal Devji Maharaj defines this in Swarved. Swamiji writes this in another way. Jahi bhumi jo drishya hai, rahat samne aaye, jad chetan ke bhed mein, par apara chhavi chhaye. So now he goes a little further. Now once you have defined what is jad and chetan, jad is nothing but inert, chetan is nothing but what's conscious. Now these are two entities that makes this world. Not this world, the entire universe, the cosmos and beyond, even the multiverses. There are only two types of entities. One is called conscious, one is called the inert. Now, but there are two different knowledge also, the way to understand them. And that is the para and apara vidya. Apara vidya is all the knowledge that is confined and talks about the inert world, including the knowledge which you have learned in your school and college, and that helps you to get the livelihood. This is all a part of apara vidya. And the knowledge that helps you to understand or experience the non-matter which I was referring to, the conscious element, which you can't see through the eyes, which you can't understand through the instrument, you can't detect them, but they can be experienced. That knowledge is called the Paravidya. And for that, you need a special teacher. For the worldly objects that I know, all the knowledge that exists, including Vedas, Upanishads, all scriptural texts, whatever has been taught in this world thus far, are all confined to the Aparavidya. And for that, you find teachers in the world. And we have been brought up since childhood, and we've learned. And now we are all scholars in one way or the other. But our knowledge is not complete. The knowledge gets completed only when the conscious entity is also understood and experienced. And who would experience that? Our conscious self itself, of course. You don't expect an inert object to understand the concept. It's vice versa. It's the conscious object who aspires and makes an effort to do that. But because we can't see and detect that, you need a special teacher, and that teacher is the Sadguru. So we're going to talk more about that later on. Thank you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, thank you, Hemantji. And I wonder, Vijay, if you had anything you wanted to add onto what Hemantji just shared with us in terms of what consciousness is, what the building blocks of consciousness are, just so that we can start to move this maybe toward even understanding how the two interact with each other.
Hemantji explained beautifully what consciousness is and the characteristics of something, of an entity that makes it conscious. Mainly the desire, the effort, and the knowledge. These are the building blocks. So this is what makes an entity conscious, which is beyond the grasp of one's sensory organs. The whole talk of consciousness literally is beyond the reach of these senses.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if I interjected there. Please
No.
do continue.
I'm sorry. That's basically what I mean. Pretty much what's consciousness and what's conscious entity. Hemantji explained it beautifully.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and just to kind of layer a little bit on top of what we're all discussing, consciousness, and there's a question which I do want to ask you both after we come back from the bhajan, which is, if in the modern world we learn that to validate something, we can go through a rigorous process of methodology, validation, and then extracting findings and comparing them to the expected findings. You could call that scientific rigor, you could call it whatever you'd like. In the conscious world, when we're saying that there's no instruments by which we can measure and we can quantify, the question for a seeker really becomes, how do I know that the experience I'm having of consciousness, or the conscious experiences I'm having, are in fact accurate, or they are moving me in a particular direction, or they are moving me in a different direction? So I'm just going to leave that there in the air until we come back from our bhajan. I'd love to explore this with you both. But before we do that, let's move toward a quick bhajan from Sankalpji in India. He's joining us, I believe, from Bangalore, and he'll be sharing a small bhajan with us, after which we'll come back and continue our discussion. And just to remind you all, as you're thinking through all the things we're talking about, please do visit slido.com/VYGOS, or the WhatsApp number on screen. We'd love to hear what you would like to hear about more, and for us to discuss more. So over to you, Sankalpji, and then let's come back and continue our discussion.
It's my privilege to present a bhajan in this forum. Today's bhajan is taken from the collection of Kabir Sahab. Here is the bhajan. Jai Sadgurudev. मिट्टी में मिलेगी मिट्टी, पानी में पानी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी, पानी का बबूला जैसी तेरी जिंदगानी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी। भाई और बंधु तेरे काम नहीं आएंगे, कुटुंब कबीला सब यही छूट जाएंगे। भाई और बंधु तेरे काम नहीं आएंगे, कुटुंब कबीला सब यही छूट जाएंगे। कहाँ संग चलेंगे तेरे मित्र और साथी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी। मिट्टी में मिलेगी मिट्टी, पानी में पानी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी। रही ना निशानी जग में राजा और वजीरों की, एक एक सांस तेरी लाख लाख हीरों की। रही ना निशानी जग में राजा और वजीरों की, एक एक सांस तेरी लाख लाख हीरों की। 2.5 गज टुकड़ा डोली होएगी रवानी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी। मिट्टी में मिलेगी मिट्टी, पानी में पानी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी। खाना और पीना केवल नहीं तेरा काम है, गुरु का विज्ञान ले ले जहाँ हरि नाम है। खाना और पल केवल नहीं तेरा काम है, गुरु का विज्ञान ले ले जहाँ हरि नाम है। बीत न जाए तेरी सारी जिंदगानी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी। मिट्टी में मिलेगी मिट्टी, पानी में पानी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी। कर ले कमाई जग में सद्गुरु नाम की, इसी में भलाई तेरी बात होगी काम की। कर ले कमाई जग में सद्गुरु नाम की, इसी में भलाई तेरी बात होगी काम की। जन्म को सफल तो कर ले, कर मत नादानी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी। मिट्टी में मिलेगी मिट्टी, पानी में पानी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी। पानी का बबूला जैसी तेरी जिंदगानी, अरे अभिमानी, अरे अभिमानी। सदगुरुदेव की जय।
Thank you, Sankalp ji. A heartful thanks to you for, really sharing such a soulful bhajan with us. The bhajan which Sankalp ji just shared is actually a very topical one, one which reminds us that the inert will always remain the inert. Mitti mein milegi mitti. And the conscious is the one which we are striving for, which we are seeking. So thank you once more, Sankalp ji, for this beautiful bhajan. So we're back. Let's continue our discussion from before we left. So I left an interesting thought hanging in the air there near the end. So I'd like to hand over to perhaps Hemant ji to start, and then Vijay ji, of course. And the question really was, how do we bring rigor into conscious experience? If we're saying, and if the experience is that no scientific instrument can guide us in terms of measuring, what is happening, then how do we reason about a domain which is not inert in nature?
That's a very, very interesting question. Saurabh actually has given a pointer to that. And of course, even if you don't have a rigor, your body itself is a lab. It's a tool, and we can harness everything that resides within us to bring it out, and we can experience that. But then it starts with an inquisitive question. Swamiji says, "Kar vichar main kaun hu, ब्रह्म को जगद आधार, कैसे जग उत्पन्न है, लीन है कौन विधि पार, कौन सत्य कर्तव्य है, दुख सुख कैसे होए, बद्ध मुक्त के ही भांति सो, ग्रहण करो सत सोए." Upanishad also says, "Athato Brahma Jigyasa." We have the desire to understand or know the truth, the Brahm, the bliss we talk about. So what does this Swarved says? Why don't we even think about it? Are we aware as a conscious entity that who we are in reality, where we came from, what this life is all is about? Are we aware that we are living in a life of a bondage, that we have been confined? We are trapped in vicious life cycles of births and rebirths. Are we aware why this world exists in the first place? Why this human birth? Why is it so special? These questions are posed to us as a conscious entity. We don't really need a scientific rigor. We can actually just have to stop from a continuous, incessant running for pursuit of a sensual gratification. We are running after worldly things, which, as Vijay mentioned in the beginning, that it's transient in nature. Things change. What we see now changes the very next moment. Every 2 weeks, our blood cells completely transforms us. And every 3 months, we have a new body. All the cells change and transform. We know that from a scientific point of view. But as far as conscious entity, which does not undergo any change, unfortunately, is the most neglected part. We don't even care. Why? Because we are running for that sensual pleasure, constant pursuit of joy and happiness. There's nothing wrong about it. But we need to think. We need to think. That's what all the saints wants us to. Any scientific experiment starts with thinking. First the thought comes, and then comes the hypothesis, and then you devise an experiment to check whether the hypothesis is correct or incorrect, or is there something more. And often the discoveries happen accidentally, because that's what's not understood comes in front of us. Agreed that we don't experience, we don't see the conscious, but surely it can be experienced. Why? It's very simple. We have feelings, we have emotions. We react to different emotions the way it comes to us. We react to life every single way. We start from work, we start for work, we encounter people on the road, in your office, in your home, in your environment, to your friends, family, societies. We have emotions. That doesn't come from an inert object. That comes from a conscious being. So conscious means that it's all about knowledge. But what kind of knowledge? That's where the important thing comes into picture. We are going to talk a little more on it as we go a little deeper into the spiritual aspect. But at this moment, I would want to conclude here that everything can be understood only when we start thinking in the right direction. And that right direction is given by our saints and the spiritual scriptures that gives us pointers. Today, in the world of fast age, because it's not related to our livelihood, it's not related to our bread and butter, we don't think and act. But remember that there is something which you all understand, that we live a life as if we don't die. But when we die, we live as if we have never even lived in this earth. So we die, we just perish. Even Einstein said that all those who felt that they will be formidable, they will be invincible for this world, are now in the coffins somewhere, perhaps rotting. So the life is much more than what meets our eye. Thank you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, thank you, Hemantji, for that beautiful explanation. And Vijay, I wanted to get your thoughts on a question we've actually received from one of our listeners. They ask, can inert always be perishable? And, as you're thinking through that, I'd also just like to add one more thing on, which is if you could start giving us some insight into, firstly, whether the inert is always perishable, and then also in terms of how the inert and conscious interact, just so we can drive this forward.
Okay. Inert, the true nature of inert is it's always perishable. It's the conscious entities are the ones which are eternal. So I mean, if that's a straight answer about if inert is always perishable, including this whole cosmos which has been created, precious, and the holy texts talk about it very clearly. Now, talking about how what's the interaction between inert and conscious entities. Earlier these sessions we talked about the entity called mind, how it basically plays a role in taking the energy or the consciousness of the soul and interacting with the sensory organs through outside world, and what role the mind plays. All elements of inert prakriti basically have transient relationships or relations with the soul. They cannot stay in one form. That this is why, by the gain and loss of them, the soul, which is the conscious entity, experiences temporary happiness and sorrow. The only way one can, while we are deriving pleasure from the world and its worldly objects, there's a need to understand the essence of the two paths which Swamiji clearly talked about, which are Preya and Shreya. There is a need of understanding this too. We should be ready to grasp its essence with a very liberal thought. What is Preyanand and what is Shreyanand? How are both of vital importance to our lives? We need to understand that too. The temporary nature, Prayanand, is a pleasure experienced in nature through our external organs, whereas Shreyanand is the bliss arising out of the union of the conscious soul with the Supreme Soul, which is basically the ultimate goal of yoga. Pleasure enjoyed by the external organs is Prayanand, and the conscious bliss enjoyed by the pure form of the soul is Shreyanand. Of course, one who treads only in the Praya limits himself or herself to the material world, and the other who treads only in the Shreya tends to flee away from his responsibilities. Spirituality does not teach you to shirk away from responsibilities, of course. One is solely in pursuit of prayer, and the other is always pursuing Shreya. We must understand that the core essence of prayer and Shreya conciliate together. And that's basically how we can ensure how the inert and the conscious entities interact. Hopefully I addressed that question, Abhinavji.
Yeah, most definitely. To summarize, like basically the inert sources of happiness come under, I don't want to mispronounce this, but they come under prayer, or is it Shreya? Let me just double. Yeah.
The inert is prayer. Yeah.
Yes, the inert is prayer, and the conscious is Shreya. And the inert we source from our sensory organs, and the Shreya we source from our conscious soul and our conscious entity within. And it's a great segue into another question, which is, there is this concept in spirituality which we hear about, which is, happiness and bliss. And if we look at the modern science and modern world, we hear about how there's different chemicals in our body, like dopamine and serotonin and all these different things, which give us joy, or different measures of joy. So the question which crops up is, what is the difference between bliss and happiness? Is bliss just another way of maybe maximizing some chemicals in the body, or is it experienced differently? How do the yogis explain the difference between bliss and happiness? Perhaps I'll direct this toward you, Hemantji.
The yogis actually experience, and as Vijay has already mentioned, that only when the union with the self or the conscious entity gets connected with the super conscious entity, that's when it pervades, engulfs the entire cosmos. It's also in the inert object, it's also pervading that energy in the conscious, our own self. But we are still not yet connected with it. The moment you're connected with it through the technique called yoga, the real meditation, which Sadhguru Davuluri Maharaj has taught to this world since 1924, that knowledge actually, the experience of that super conscious entity is what is the true bliss, or which Vijay has mentioned as Shreyanand. That bliss is eternal, that's everlasting, that never finishes. It's been there since time immemorial. You just need to experience it. You just need to get connected from a perennial source of river that's not going to dry up, compared to those rivers which just are seasonal, and they can be referred to as something which you get from the worldly objects. Or Saurabh again beautifully explains it. Seek boond sam jagat sukh, kasha samundar jaan. Paramanand ko kimi kahu, shakya vachan nahi gyan. If you go by the definition of Saurabh, See, we have this broomstick, right? And if you just take one single thread or stick of that broom, the amount of water drop that holds at the end of that stick, all the happiness which you derive from the worldly objects, which we call prayanam, is confined to that small droplet. And that is distributed throughout this world. That is all. And what is that connection when you get connected with the superconscious entity, or the Lord Almighty, or the God, whatever we say, or the bliss we were referring to, the eternal happiness, is that samundra, or is the ocean of bliss. It's infinite. It's so big that it's unimaginable. That happiness is right in front of us. We just can't see it. We just can't experience it. And that experience comes from spirituality. That is what Sadhguru Dev wants to give us to us. Wants us to get connected to that. And that source is not somewhere outside in the universe, which we should go out and seek. It's within us. But there is a technique, a method to go and get connected to that. And that connection happens through the Vihangam Yoga meditation. The only impediment to this is, as Vijay mentioned, the mind. The mind creates problems. It does not want us to reach there, only when the mind is untamed. But the moment the mind is made pure, it's tamed. The same mind helps us to reach to that place. And a time comes when the mind clears the way and the soul reaches that source of happiness, which we are referring to as Sri Anand. Over to you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, thank you, Hemant. And I've got two more quick-fire questions I wanted to ask you, and maybe we'll also hand over to Vijay for a quick-fire response as we start to wrap up. We've got two more questions coming in from our listeners, so thank you both. We've got one anonymous listener and one listener named John, so thank you both. One of the questions is a robot conscious? Please explain why. And the second question is, how does it help understanding what is inert and what is conscious in the practice of meditation?
So the question is to?
So, first, let's start with you first, perhaps, Hemant, and then we'll wrap up with Vijay.
Okay, robot is not conscious. It's a program. It's a device that's programmed according to you, the way you have devised it. And generally, the robots are made for a particular purpose. And they're very simple to understand that even if it reacts, even if it's showing emotions to you, that emotions is again a set of programs, a set of codes, algorithms that is made to forces different aspect of the face of robots or the hands or the leg movements that a robot does. So it has nothing to do with consciousness. Consciousness is much more deep within us. We cannot talk about feelings to a robot, although it can react to your emotions, but it cannot. Even if it comes with its own emotions, that is something which is very sufficient. Our emotions are deep within us. So the difference between robot and humans is that even if it's a humanoid is not humans. And the simple reason is that if you just burn a humanoid, it just burns off. You make another humanoid. It's not for the human. The moment you do that, you lose the body and you have to find another body for a human to do that. So that we all understand that we are living in a life form, a biological life form. So that's the answer to the first question. What was the second question, Abhinavji?
Yeah, second question was, how does an understanding of what is inert and conscious help us in meditation practice?
Actually, I would actually pose this question to a little more deeper meaning, is that what defines the consciousness? See, when we talk about heat and cold, we don't talk about cold. We talk about heat. It's just the absence of heat is what's cool. And something like darkness and light. Absence of light is what's called darkness. So the light has not yet reached that place, so it appears dark. So I would actually think it from a spiritual aspect as like consciousness means knowledge. But what knowledge? Why knowledge? The Gyan, which we say, has been upheld as the most important by all scriptures, all saints and philosophers. I think to progress in spirituality is all about the knowledge about humility, humbleness, to forgive and to be forgiven, to give up your ego, to be adorned with all the virtues of a human, all the attributes of a human, to be tolerant and not be impulsive, to be understood, to understand, to listen, then to speak. That all defines consciousness. Another aspect is, are we aware of the truth? Of the objects or entities that we interact on a daily basis? When we say truth, Saurabh defines it, Jo vastu jaisa rahe, taisa vako jaan. To understand the object as is the most important aspect. That is what the spirituality ensures. It wants you to bring us towards the truth. To know things without illusion or confusion, without doubt, with complete clarity. The other aspect of consciousness is to learn from mistakes. And it starts with accepting your mistake. To get up and remain formidable at difficult times. That's also a part of spiritual pursuit. And the most importantly, to set off all your unnecessary baggages of malices, corrupt practices, impurities that is brought about by the mind. Another aspect is to simplify. Yes, we all understand that we are a living organisms which are very complex biologically, but the building block of life is cell, which is very simple. To give up all your pride and ego is very, very important. We all understand humility and humbleness. It is respected everywhere in every walk of life. It brings us great responsibility. And I would wind up by quoting the word surrender. Surrender. Submit to the master, for he is the protector. And Saurabh wraps it up like this. Jo kuch the tum aaj lag, sabhi mitao bhar, pakke shishya tab hi bano, deen adheen sanat. So whatever you have been composed of till date, give up all of those things. Only then you can become a true disciple. So this applies to a disciple as well. Only when you surrender, only then the spirituality dawns upon you. So the consciousness has a very big, very large, and very comprehensive meaning. And wherever there is no consciousness, conscious thought about awareness, it's, I would say, as inert. So that would be my take on this, Abhinavji.
Thank you, Hemant. And I apologize to Vijay. In the interest of time, I think we'll have to move toward the end of our session today. But I thank you both humbly for joining us this week.
Thank you, Abhinavji.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've learned a lot from both of your explanations. So thank you, Hemant, and thank you, Vijay. Let's go toward the Shanti part and then go toward a quick fire summary.
विराग त्याग की शांति हो, उदासीनता शांति, सेवा जित शिष्य शांति हो, सत्य शांति हो शांति। हे प्रभु शांति स्वरूप हो, शांति शांतिमय शांति, शांति शांति जन शांति हो, पूर्ण शांतिमय शांति। हे प्रभु शांति प्रदान कर, दूर हो सर्व अशांति। देव सदा फल शांति में, शांति शांति सुख शांति। हे प्रभु शांति प्रदान कर, दूर हो सर्व अशांति। देव सदा फल शांति में, शांति शांति सुख शांति।
So with that, we come toward the end of another week on the Vihangam Yoga Global Online Satsang. This week's topic was strengthening meditation, lesson 2, consciousness and inertness. You know, why are the things that we talked about today so important? How do they strengthen our urge to meditate? Well, as we discussed today, the concept of inertness and consciousness are both extremely deep. Inertness captures the theory, the knowledge which we acquire of the world in front of us, which we are exposed to by sensory organs. And consciousness entails the world and the knowledge we acquire by going within. The journey of spirituality, if you want to look at it in a simple way, is a path which traverses inertness and exposes us to the world of consciousness. And so by understanding consciousness and what it really is, and understanding how it exposes us to the universe of untouched bliss, we can start to understand why meditation is so important. Because it is only through meditation that we can still the waters of the mind and start to trace it back to the engine of the body, to the soul, and then start to trace that back to the engine of the cosmos itself. So thank you everyone for joining us this week. We look forward to sharing another beautiful session with you this coming week. For now, Jai Sudev, this is Abhinav signing off from Sydney. See you next week.